Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're diving into an era that completely rewrote the map and the future of an entire continent. We're going to explore how the relentless push of colonial expansion essentially set North America on fire, igniting a series of devastating interconnected conflicts in the late 17th and early 18th centuries. To really understand this incredibly volatile era, we'll take a geographical tour, from a continent in conflict to New England's shattered peace, Virginia's war within, the Pueblo Uprising, South Carolina's narrow escape, and finally, the end of peace in Pennsylvania. Section 1. A Continent in Conflict, the Spark to the Powder Keg. Let's establish just how clustered and widespread this violence actually was. Think about this. Within just a 5-year window, 3 entirely separate regions of the North American continent just erupted into catastrophic violence. You've got King Philip's War breaking out in 1675, Bacon's Rebellion erupting right on its heels in 1676, and the incredible Pueblo Revolt striking the Spanish in 1680. It's wild to think about, but extreme turmoil wasn't just some rare glitch. It was quite literally the defining feature of the era. Section 2. New England's Shattered Peace, King Philip's War. Let's start our tour in New England. For decades, Native Americans and English colonists largely maintained a delicate peace. They traded, they even arbitrated disputes together. But things were getting incredibly unequal. The spark that finally lit the match was the 1675 Plymouth Court execution of 3 Wampanoag warriors. This triggered a massive retaliation led by the Wampanoag sachem Metacom or King Philip. It escalated into a horrifying 14-month maelstrom. The violence was just terrifying and totally indiscriminate. At one point, the English forces compounded the tragedy by attacking the powerful yet completely neutral Narragansett tribe. In what became known as the Great Swamp Fight, English forces burned a main village and gunned down as many as 1,000 neutral Narragansett men, women, and children. The war only ended when colonial forces, relying heavily on Native allies, finally tracked down Metacom, who was slain by a Christian Native American in August of 1676. The demographic collapse that followed is absolutely staggering. Just a few years before the war, in 1670, Native Americans made up roughly 25% of New England's population. But after a conflict where thousands perished, fled, or were sold into slavery, that number plummeted to a mere 10% by 1680. The entire political and demographic landscape of New England was forever rewritten. And the scars of a war like that don't just fade away. That deep-seated trauma and the enduring tension with Native peoples really lingered in the colonial psyche. Fast forward 16 years, and that unresolved paranoia actually helped fuel a totally different kind of panic in Massachusetts. A woman named Tituba, an enslaved Native American or African woman, found herself right at the center of the Salem witch trials. This massive fear of the supernatural swept through the region, ultimately resulting in the tragic execution of 20 people. Section 3. Virginia's War Within, Bacon's Rebellion. Let's travel down the coast to Virginia in that exact same year of 1676. What's so fascinating here is how quickly minor grievances can spiral into absolute chaos. A group of Dogue people tried to collect a debt from a wealthy planter. When he refused to pay, they took his pigs. That's it, a stolen pig. But that single theft sparked retaliatory raids, and then a disastrous mistake where the Virginia militia accidentally attacked the neutral Susquehannock tribe. Almost overnight, this petty argument escalated step by step into a catastrophic frontier war, and soon after, a massive internal rebellion led by a charismatic young guy named Nathaniel Bacon. The whole thing peaked in a showdown right in the heart of Jamestown that honestly feels like a scene straight out of a movie. Bacon brings his army of frustrated frontiersmen and confronts the cautious 70-year-old governor, Sir William Berkeley, demanding a commission to wage universal war against all Native Americans. Berkeley, totally unafraid, stepped in front of this angry mob, tore open his shirt, and literally dared the young rebel leader to shoot him in the heart. He shouted, "Here, shoot me. Before God, it is a fair mark. Shoot." Bacon hesitated, but ultimately forced the governor's hand through sheer intimidation. Virginia had its general, and Bacon had his war. Now, Bacon's rebellion was remarkably complex. His forces uniquely united poor white indentured servants and enslaved black people, who were all fighting side by side because they were promised freedom. The rebellion itself fell apart when Bacon suddenly died of typhus in 1676, and a royal fleet arrived to restore order, but the underlying terror it struck in the hearts of the elite was permanent. Wealthy planters realized that a united underclass was a huge direct threat to their power. Because of this, they rapidly accelerated their shift away from white indentured servitude, moving instead toward a heavy, brutal reliance on the transatlantic African slave trade to build their plantation system.
Section 4. The Pueblo Uprising. Total Overthrow.
Let's shift our focus westward, all the way across the continent to the Spanish Empire in present-day New Mexico. The Spanish had held their grip on the region by violently suppressing Native American beliefs, burning sacred masks, banishing traditional practices. Operating from spectacular multi-storied bases like the Taos Pueblo, a religious leader named Pope began organizing. He had actually been arrested and publicly whipped for sorcery a few years prior. But in 1680, Pope successfully united various Puebloan groups to rise up simultaneously against the Franciscan priests and colonial authorities. And the rebellion was an absolute, unprecedented success. The Puebloan warriors killed 400 Spaniards and forced 2,000 others to flee. They systematically wiped out traces of colonial rule, destroyed churches, and even washed away their Christian baptisms in the rivers. Pope boldly proclaimed, "The God of the Christians is dead." Thanks to this incredible uprising, the Spanish were forced into a full 12-year exile from the entire region. Section 5. South Carolina's narrow escape, the Yamasee War. Decades later, in 1715, we see this exact same pattern again, where colonial overreach triggers massive violence, this time in South Carolina. The Yamasee people have been Carolina's closest allies and their most lucrative trading partners. They depended heavily on English courts to regulate trade fairly. But when feuds between corrupt English agents completely crippled those diplomatic courts, shutting down peaceful negotiation, the Yamasee had had enough. They retaliated violently, killing traders, and launched an offensive that advanced within just miles of Charlestown, nearly wiping the colony right off the map. Charlestown survived, but only by the skin of its teeth, thanks to securing a crucial alliance with the Cherokee. By 1717, the conflict subsided, but the aftermath totally transformed the South. The incredibly lucrative, brutal trade in enslaved Native Americans, which had claimed 50,000 souls over 5 decades, became way too dangerous and largely dwindled. Instead, the colonies pivoted sharply. They began heavily importing enslaved Africans to work on these sprawling new rice plantations. This really marks the birth of the Old South. Section 6. The End of Peace, Pennsylvania's Fraud. Finally, let's look at Pennsylvania. This is a vital example because Pennsylvania was originally founded on a unique promise of peaceful coexistence. The founder, William Penn, explicitly demanded that colonists obtain territory through fair, peaceful purchase rather than violence. But as immigration boomed, his sons had a very different approach. In 1737, they executed the notorious walking purchase. The Delaware leaders agreed to sell a tract of land measured by how far a man could walk in a day and a half. But the Penns deceitfully hired a team of highly trained professional runners and had them sprint along a previously cleared trail. Through this deeply calculated, premeditated fraud, the colonial government essentially weaponized a peace treaty. They swindled the Delaware people out of a staggering 1,200 square miles of land. This huge betrayal permanently destroyed relations, forcing the Delaware to migrate westward, straight into the arms of the French. And that in turn directly set the stage for the massive 7 Years' War. So as we wrap up this continent-wide tour of turmoil, we're left with a pretty heavy realization. We've seen the brutal, fiery warfare of New England, the internal chaos in Virginia, outright rebellion in New Mexico, and the near collapse of South Carolina. And then we saw Pennsylvania, where violence was just replaced by deceptive legal fraud. Whether it was outright war or calculated fraud, both yielded the exact same tragic result, the total displacement of indigenous peoples. So, looking at the entirety of this era, we have to ask ourselves, given the relentless pressure of colonial expansion, was lasting, peaceful coexistence in North America ever truly an option? It's a question that challenges almost everything we think we know about the founding of the continent. Thanks for joining me on this explainer. Keep questioning the history you've been taught, and I'll catch you next time.